When you boil down the essentials of so much writing, what you get is the need for vivid, original, specific detail. In a college essay, the story comes alive when a student goes way past the generalities and gives specific examples. In an argument essay, the intricate examples and counter argument that is explained with depth makes the most impact. In any kind of research, carefully exploring the core of the ideas with the most interesting possible language will hook and hold the reader's attention. And in narrative, as we've seen, eminently transferable to other areas of writing, it's the details. I took a copywriting class once where they boiled this concept down to a sandwich. Never say someone ate a sandwich in your writing. Say it was a pastrami-on-rye with extra mustard and a sheaf of pickles. Say it was a PB&J, positively oozing the J. Say it was a double-decker smash burger with Jimmy's special sauce and extra crispy sweet potato fries. See the difference? Who wants a sandwich? But here's the thing. When you tell a kid they need more details, that doesn't exactly come alive for them. You need more details in your request for details. They need to see and feel what you mean, just like you need to see and feel the world of their writing. So today on the pod, let's dive into 6 strategies you can use with your students to help improve their narrative writing detail. Your students may already have some of these down, but others may be new, or areas that will help with something causing them to struggle. As with any set of writing strategies, teach what they actually need. Apply it to their current writing projects. Are you ready? Let's go. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more. More creativity, more engagement, more joy, and no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. So let's start by introducing these 6 strategies. These are the ones we're going to be diving into. Number 1, use sensory detail. Number 2, incorporate dialogue. Number 3, trigger memories within the action. Number 4, build suspense by throwing a ball in the air. Number 5, when it comes to emotion, show, don't tell. And number 6, make use of internal monologue. Each of these adds a helpful layer to narrative in its own way, and they can all be layered together like an amazing narrative wedding cake. So here we go. We're going to start with narrative strategy number 1, sensory details. This one's the oldest trick in the book, so let's start here. Sensory details are an essential part of narrative writing, and I think that most of your students have heard that by the time they get to your class. But they might not realize how much they're focusing in on certain senses. The easiest sense to tap into in writing is sight, and it's a place where many writers get stuck. I recently read the book Narrative Writing by George Hillocks Jr., and he talks about helping students with the more forgotten senses like touch and smell. This is a really good thing to be aware of. Some of the ideas that he shares in his book are really fabulous. I love the one where he talks about bringing in shells for his students to feel and really look at the texture of, and then write descriptions of so that other students can read their descriptions and then try to match them to the shell. That's a really neat one for the kind of touch and texture sense. Another really cool idea he talks about is bringing in all these little scent vials and using them as springboards for different kinds of writing to get students thinking more about smell. There are a lot of fun activities in George Hillocks Jr.'s book, but we won't stick on that book for too long because, of course, there are many ways to practice sensory details. Another one that jumps to mind for me is to use the ideas behind Angela Stockman's pioneering work in the writing makerspace. She's been on the show a couple of times. I love her ideas. And I think one easy way it could apply here is to have students create collages for settings or characters or scenes that incorporate a lot of different elements of the senses and then write based on the collage. So maybe they take 3 minutes, they create this digital collage of a living room or a beachfront scene or a fireplace burning in a living room or the top of a mountain with like a little picnic laid out on the grass or whatever. Once they've created a very fast collage of a scene, now when they start writing something into that scene, they can look, okay, I chose this blue velvet couch. Now I'm going to describe the blue velvet couch. I can like kind of imagine the feel of it because you're looking right at it, right? You can see the depth of the velvet. You can see the deep blue. You can imagine how it might feel to sit on. Or maybe, you've put in your mountain picnic all these really cool desserts. So of course you're going to be talking about the taste of those different desserts as you write the scene that happens while two characters are having a picnic on the blanket and eating this chocolate cake and creme brulee or whatever it is. Another way to launch students into sensory detail that I've used is to bring in little images. They can be postcards or they could just be pictures that you've cut out or printed, and have students use them as postcards. So have them imagine, okay, I'm sitting somewhere, I've purchased this postcard, and I'm going to write to my friend a sensory description of the place that I'm in. So if the postcard is like under the Eiffel Tower in Paris or, in the middle of New York with the city skyline showing, then the student is going to say like, dear somebody, my trip to New York is going great. And then they need to try to paint a sensory picture for their friend. They don't actually write on the postcard. They just write on their notebook. But the postcard provides this fun sort of launch prompt for trying to share the senses of a new place with whoever they're writing to. Another way you could do this is to share 30 seconds of a drone video of some stunning place and then pause it and ask students to set up a scene where a character is walking through that space, engaging all 5 senses, and they're just going to write based on the video that they saw and then their imagination. There are a million ways to practice sensory detail, but that's our first strategy, practicing sensory detail, layering it into your writing. Strategy number 2, incorporate dialogue. Characters can reveal so much about themselves by what they say, and that eliminates the need for long exposition in a story. It helps students to zoom in, to really like get into the action and not spend a long time on the description. This one really lends itself to having students go searching for mentors in their choice reading books. Consider taking 10 minutes and having students all grab the book that they're reading, write down examples of dialogue, choose their favorite, and then throw it up on the wall in sort of a big dialogue mural. I wouldn't recommend the popular Said is Dead graveyard activity. I've seen this in a lot of places. I saw it most recently in a book on writing, on teaching writing, but I don't agree. I think we need said. I think if you eliminate said completely, you're in trouble. I think it is a great idea to help students consider that there are a lot of other ways to attribute dialogue. There are many different verbs you can use after you do dialogue. You can do raged, hissed, ranted, soothed, whispered, mumbled, sang, purred, gushed, bubbled, enthused, chattered, jabbered, howled, shouted, screamed, complained, groused, grumped, murmured, muttered, mouthed. There are a lot, right? But if you tell them they have to use that all the time and not use said at all, let's take a little snapshot of what dialogue might be like then. That's great, purred Karen. I don't think so, muttered Fred. Well, I don't care what you think, raged Karen. I don't care whether you care, groused Fred. Whatever! I'm leaving, howled Karen. So anyway, you get the idea. It's a bit over the top. And so while I do think you want to help students think about the variety of words they can use for dialogue attribution, when you're teaching dialogue, I wouldn't can said altogether. As I was brainstorming dialogue activities recently, one fun way that I came up with is to create kind of a party across your whiteboard or wall. Give students a chance and partners to come up with a character. They can pull one digitally with a screenshot. They can draw one. Then they need to give their character a name, give their character some attributes, and draw a little dialogue bubble with an example of something their character might say at a party, like an answer to the question, hey, what's up? Or how's it going? Or what'd you do today? Or whatever. That way, once other people are looking at the character, they have a little sense of how they speak. Then have all your students throw their characters up on the wall or like out in the middle of the floor where everybody can see them, and have them move around and pick the characters that they want to use to form a scene with dialogue at a party. So they're going to write a little short conversation involving any of the characters on the floor. And so once again, it kind of pulls from this idea of the makerspace where like first you create the character, then you write the dialogue. And it's easier because you can see what the character looks like. You know a little bit of the character's background. You've seen a little bit of their style of speech. And so for students who have a little trouble with the writer's block of just coming up with a dialogue out of nowhere, this can be a really great prompt. Okay, narrative strategy number 3, trigger a memory. The trigger a memory strategy gives students an easy, memorable way to play around with pacing and order. With trigger a memory, they can build in a scene from a previous part of any character's life, which is going to give helpful information about the character at any time within the story. So they're able to play around with narrative order. They're able to zoom in on a moment in a unique way. And it's kind of like a memorable concept, trigger a memory. Here's how it works. 1 minute, say you've got a character sticking their hand into a buttery bowl of hot, salty popcorn. In the next, they're remembering the last time they ate popcorn with their favorite cousin Jake on a 12-day backpacking trip through the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, right before that black bear wandered into camp. 1 minute, a character is putting on a necklace before a formal dance in 11th grade. In the next, they're remembering their mom clasping it behind them when they were 3 and saying, "Make a wish, honey." 1 minute, a character walks by a garage sale where they're selling an old copy of Monopoly. In the next minute, they're back in 2nd grade playing a weekend straight of Monopoly with their best friend Kate, and we find out that that's when the character realized they wanted to be a realtor. You getting the idea? There are a lot of different ways you could play around with this strategy. One of my favorites is to use a deck of cards, either physical, if you have a barrage of decks of cards like my family, or digital, if you're handy with screenshots and you can put together a fun slide of wacky card decks with all different kinds of covers and designs. Invite students to write a scene in which characters play a game together, but then when one of the character goes to grab a deck, and the student can either choose a physical deck to use as a model or one of your fun digital decks, or even you can say they can just make up whatever kind of deck they want. That triggers a memory which reveals something about the character's past. That revelation could be about the place where they got the deck. So maybe they remember a trip or a weird little shop or the corner of a city where someone was selling card decks on the street. Or maybe it triggers a memory of who they got it with and we learned something about an important relationship for that character. Or maybe it triggers a memory of a game that they used to play with the deck and something that was going on in their life when they were playing that game a lot, etc. Right? There are so many possibilities. Then, after a little bit of practice, invite students to use this same strategy in whatever writing project they're working on, except obviously it doesn't have to be a deck of cards. It could be anything. Anything can trigger a memory. That's why it's such a useful strategy. Narrative strategy number 4, build suspense by throwing a ball in the air. I used to think the idea of building suspense was really tricky to learn. It felt sort of like just this thing that advanced writers somehow learned and I didn't really get it. But then I thought about this idea of building suspense as throwing a ball in the air. And now it works for me. That metaphor made building suspense make sense. And I think that the same can happen for your students. So the idea is you teach them that one way to easily build tension or suspense in the story is by throwing a ball in the air. And then something has to happen before it hits or it's going to be a problem. Let's consider a couple of examples. So, for example, in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, spoiler alert, if you didn't read this book that came out 20 years ago, maybe advance the podcast 30 seconds, but I'm not too worried. In this story, Rowling throws a ball in the air when Sirius is captured by Dementors, and Harry and Hermione have just a few hours to turn back time, save Buckbeak, and fly to the tower to save Sirius before they catch up with their own timeline. For a huge chunk of the story in the book and then in the movie, there's this really strong current of tense suspense as readers are wondering if they can beat the clock. The ball in the air is basically Sirius's life, and they are racing, and we're all wondering, are they going to be able to catch the ball? For another example, in the YA novel, The Sun is Also a Star, Nicola Yoon throws a ball in the air when she introduces one character who's going to be deported the next day, and then brings in another character who wants to make her fall in love with him. And it turns out it would really have to be before she leaves, right? Because she only has one day. And that's like the crux of the book. Can he do it in one day? Can they fall in love in one day? That's the ball. The ball can be small. Maybe a character needs to make a cake for their best friend's birthday, which is that night, but they've never made a cake before, so they have to learn and get the ingredients and try it out, and they might fail the first 3 times, but like the party is coming, right? The ball is that they want to deliver this cake to their friend, and they need to figure out how to make it. The ball could also be big. Maybe a character needs a scholarship to go to college, and this is like a super important moment in their life. They're trying to finish their essay. They only have 2 hours left before it needs to be postmarked, and then they get food poisoning. Whoa, tension, suspense. How are they going to figure out, like, is their whole life journey going to be derailed by this food poisoning? Because the ball that's in the air is like their entire future, right? The more you hunt for this idea of the ball in the air in mentor texts and brainstorm ways to throw the ball in small and large ways in stories, the easier it's going to get for students to wield this tension-building strategy. And the more you can just refer to it as throwing a ball in the air, hopefully, like for me, the more it will make sense to them. Okay, number 5, show, don't tell when it comes to emotion. We very often tell our writers show, don't tell, right? That's probably one of the most common pieces of writerly advice that there is, but that can really feel kind of general. It's almost like we're telling them to show, not tell, not showing them to show, not tell. So for me, one way to drill down on this and see the real difference between showing and telling is to apply this concept to emotion. When students tell emotion, they almost always use the to be verb. And I think it was a long time ago, but I think it was William Zinsser in his book on writing well that first clued me into this idea that to be, overuse of the verb to be, is often a sign of weak writing. Okay, so you're gonna see this show up, and students are gonna see it show up when their characters' emotions are being described like this. He was sad. She was delighted. She was depressed. He was indignant. She was thrilled. He was distressed, right? It's a lot of was or were. And yeah, these phrases tell a bit of the story. It's better than not giving any clues about how the character feels, but how do you know that the character was delighted? Did she dance around the room making up a song about how excited she was to go to tennis camp? Did she hug everyone in the room? Did she buy everyone a chocolate popsicle? Think of Taylor Swift's line from the song, I Can Do It With a Broken Heart. I love this one. I'm so depressed, I act like it's my birthday every day. So she starts with a little bit of telling, I'm so depressed, right? That's that to be verb. I am so depressed. But she goes much further than I'm so depressed because she elaborates with this memorable image that paints a picture of her behavior. She's feeling really down, so she goes over the top trying to make everything really exciting and really fun all the time because it's the only way that she can counter her negative feelings. So when it comes to emotion, I think you can do a couple things. You can remind students to be wary of using to be, but you can also let them know that they can use it sometimes, just like was said, like we were talking about before. You don't want to completely can the to be verb. It's pretty important. But they can be specific with the kinds of emotions they say. They can say apoplectic instead of always saying mad, or they can say bubbly instead of always saying happy, or they can say stressed, nervous, overwrought instead of always saying worried. But then they can go much further and they can show how the characters are feeling. Let's say there's a character, it's a student, and they're sitting on the edge of their seat and their pulse is racing and their foot is tapping. That's going to be a lot more powerful in the story than the student who was nervous. Or say you've got a toddler in the story. The toddler who screams for 45 seconds straight, cheeks slowly turning purple with fury, is going to grip the reader a lot more than the toddler who was mad. I know you know. So a simple hack for this is just to invite students to reread drafts in search of the to be verb and circle every instance of was and were, and then see if there are some ways they can level up these descriptions and show the feelings instead of telling. Okay, last but not least, our final strategy is to help students use more internal monologue. Internal monologue is actually so fun, and it's really easy to practice. It gives students the chance to say what characters are really thinking when they're in all kinds of different situations. You might warm up on this strategy by showing some funny photos on your screen with dialogue bubbles overlaid for what the characters are saying on the outside, and then let students invent what they're really thinking, which may be very different from what they're saying. Or you could play like a little video clip from a TV series or movie that your students really like, and then pause it right in the middle of some super loaded, crucial moment and invite them to write monologue for one of the characters. Now, if your students are new at internal monologue, completely new, you might want to give them a little bit of background in terms of how to punctuate it. There are two different options. One is to switch over to italics when they go to internal monologue. And when they're just writing in their notebook, that might be kind of hard. So you could just invite them to write in like italics in parentheses above the internal monologue so that when they type it at some point, they know what to do. Or, and plenty of authors do this as well, they can let the reader know they're going internal with a little clue like, she thought to herself, or Jeff frowned, wondering, and then go into the internal monologue, right? So you can show mentor text for this. You can let students find their own mentor text in choice reading books to show them these options. If you happen to have Trevor Noah's Born a Crime, the very first page has a great example that actually uses like the little clue and the italics for a bit of internal monologue that's part of his kind of introduction of his mother and his book overall. So that's a fun example. Okay, my friend, we've gone through these 6 craft moves you can work with your students on. They may already be good at some of them. You don't need to teach all 6, but maybe you found 1 or 2 or 5 that would be useful to your students. As you build workshops to teach these strategies, keep in mind that as you practice a new craft move, you're going to want to immediately apply it to what students are working on. So build these in along the way as your students are writing stories, memoirs, scenes, whatever. Don't just randomly roll out a different workshop every Friday for 6 weeks that doesn't really connect back to what students are working on. My best advice would be to integrate whatever ones feel most relevant to your students within some kind of narrative writing unit, and after the practice, immediately have them apply the strategy to whatever draft they're working hard on, hopefully with the eventual view of sharing it with an authentic audience. And along the way, as we've hinted at here and there throughout, try to use mentors from class, so from your choice reading program, from your whole class reads, so that your students are also seeing the connections between what they're reading and what the writers that they're reading are doing well, and then what they're writing. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about these 6 craft moves for narrative writing. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.